been a quarterback that's like sat behind Tom Brady for like, 10 years. And then all of a sudden Brady moves on. And then they're like, okay, but it's like, we're not going to play this year. And you're like, oh, come on. But I like finally got here. Like I finally got this chance. And so, it's just kind of how it feels right now. But
when everything went down, when they started canceling stuff, you are the first person I just thought, man, what a bummer. Like, I know how excited you were. Not that other guys aren't, and I thought about Patrick too, but I was like, God, man, just breaking that whole barrier down and getting in there, and then this happens. I'm like, that has to be, I don't know. I would have been crushed.
Oh, I mean, it's difficult, and it's like, I moved down here, right? So I went from Indiana, I picked up and moved down here, it's been great. But it's like, I moved down here for like, to work down here. And then B, I was like, sweet, I'm gonna be really close to my family. My family's in LA. I can't even go see them right now.
Yeah.
We're all isolated, so I can't even see them right now. So I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like I'm just chilling here in Arizona. Like thankfully the weather's been gorgeous. So I get outside a lot and,
That's a huge thing. Like we live a mile and a half from my parents and I see my dad every day. And I think they came over on Easter and hid eggs in our yard for the girls. And like we took BP at the field and they like drove their car and watched and like that's it, and he's FaceTimed to Jaden quite a bit, but other than that, it's strange.
I'm envious of that. I miss my parents right now. I got to see my mom. My mom was here when they shut Major League Baseball down. My mom was here for the day the sports world stopped.
Really?
So they were here to watch the Cubs. The big league Cubs were supposed to play the Dodgers for a spring training game. And so I grew up Dodger fan. So my whole family came here and they were going to go and wear their Dodger stuff because me working for the Cubs doesn't mean anything apparently. So they were, we were going to go watch the Dodgers Cubs game. And that game got canceled because we did have rain that day. So, but it got canceled. And then that night, everything that was the night, like, the NBA just was like taking people off the court and, NCAA was taking people off the court.
Yeah.
And we were like, holy crap, like this is really serious. And so then my mom was here. She stayed for a good, like, I want to say like a week or so before that. And then I got to see my family. But then, so she was here when everything was open and then left when everything was shut down. So, that's the last time I got to see any family members. Thank God for FaceTime and Zoom and
yeah. I mean, this is for something like this to happen, this is the best time ever in the history. Like it's never a good thing, but at least we have the ability to do stuff like this and stay in touch with people.
Yeah.
We are at 8:04, so I'm going to start. I actually started recording a couple minutes ago. I think probably everybody knows who Rachel is, but I'm going to give her a little bit of an intro and then she can address anything that I messed up or didn't get that she wants to get out there. But right off the bat, she was one of the first two females hired as a coach in the Major League pipeline. She is the lab technician and fourth coach for the Chicago Cubs minor league organization. What affiliate are you going to be with? Do you know?
AZL Cubs, just rookie ball.
Okay, rookie ball. But she'll be working with basically in their biomechanics lab, which she knows everything about. So she'll have all the cool gadgets that everybody likes to see, force plates, K-vest, bat sensors. I'm sure they have some kind of gaze and vision tracking there that you're going to be able to work with. And just, I mean, that stuff's awesome. She started Folden Fastpitch in 2010, where she gave hitting lessons, catching lessons, things like that. She played 5 years as a professional softball player in the NPF. 1 year she led them in home runs and RBIs and was third in batting average. She was all everything at Marshall for 4 straight years, including All-American. She won the Triple Crown there 1 year. When you're done with this, go on YouTube and pull up her highlight video because it is the awesome. I love that highlight video. I watch it all the time. I'm just like, I'm just going to watch it. It just makes me want to go like try to smash bombs myself. It is great. Watch that highlight video. The music makes it too. The music is awesome. Was that like your walk-up song?
Yeah, but I used the Phil Collins version.
Okay. I mean,
it's the drums. For everyone that doesn't know, it's In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins from the drum solo at the end of the song. It's the greatest intro music of all time.
she's just smashing bombs in that videos, and it's so hard. And were you a burner? You look like you ran fast.
I always surprised people that I was like, wow, I didn't. Folden, you're kind of like fast, but no, a burner, no, not even close.
Because you had
I think I just surprised people because I was big.
you had a couple years to double-digit steals too. I saw.
Oh, that's just because I played. Okay, so this is always a funny story. So my coach Shonda, she this is hilarious. She would laugh at this too. She is like, not while I was there, but in the years since, she's like led the nation in steals. Marshall's led the nation in steals. I think like 2 or 3 times. And so she loves to run. She's in Indiana now. She loves to run. And we had a girl in front of me named Jocelyn Bittner, JJ Bittner, and when she would get on base, she would like, steal second, steal third, and then I'd get walked, so I'd be on first base. So of those, I think I had like 12 or 13 stolen bases one year. I think like 10 of those were legitimate, just backside of a first and third. So don't get too, that's just JJ was so fast that they either never threw down or they cut the throw off every time to try to get her off third base. So like, take that with a grain of salt. And Shonda, Coach Stanton would absolutely 100% back me up on that.
Hey, they all count the same. They all count the same. And then it's like, so she's also been inducted into the Hall of Fame at her high school and at Marshall for athletics. Like, I mean, her resume as far as playing is awesome, but her coaching resume is just as awesome. She coached at Valparaiso and Holy Names University, and now obviously she's with the Cubs. And the coolest thing that I think for any softball girl out there is that Rachel had a chance to catch both Jenny Finch and Monica Abbott in professional softball. And that, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. So that is awesome.
Well, let me correct you real quick, because Shannon Depking's in here. She caught Monica Abbott for her whole life, it seems like.
Nice.
I caught Monica Abbott for 1 inning. 1 inning. I never even caught her at practice, and we had to pinch hit for Shannon in a game, and I was the DP. And so we had to pinch hit. We had already pinch run for in the game. We had to pinch hit, and this was in Akron, and I had to come in and catch Monica for 1 inning. And that was the scariest moment of my entire life. Not even close.
That she told me that story this summer, and it was a top 5 baseball softball story I've ever heard. It's great.
The biggest adrenaline rush I've ever had playing sports was catching Monica Abbott and trying to not miss.
So one more thing before we get into meat and potatoes of this. If you guys, when you're done with this, ESPN did an article on Rachel and Rachel Balkovic, who got hired by the Yankees on the same day, and they're the first 2 women to be hired into pro baseball as coaches. If you can just search Rachel Folden and ESPN, and it comes up, and it is an awesome article. And there's actually a really cool 4 or 5 minute video with Rachel Balkovic that's phenomenal as well. And having 2 daughters myself, it's just like, it's super cool to see how empowering it is, even for me as a dad of girls. I can't imagine. I had both my daughters watch it, and my wife, and they absolutely loved it, and they read the article. So watch her highlight video on YouTube, go read that article on ESPN, and read everything she's ever posted on Twitter, because she was huge in my continuation becoming a coach myself. Like, once I found her, I went all in with her content and her teachings online, and through her is where I found a lot of people that have really helped me continue to progress the last 3 years or so. So I thank you, Rachel, for tonight, and thank you for the last 3 years of everything I've learned from you, and how gracious you are and humble you are, and just, she's an awesome human being, and her personality is amazing. So is there anything you want to start off with off the bat before I ask you a couple questions?
No, I mean, I've learned a lot from you too. I think you're I appreciate coaches that put content out there. Like, it's very, very easy, whatever you want your message to be, right? If you want your message to be female empowerment, then talk about it and tell people how to achieve that, right? If your message is, hitting mechanics, then put out stuff on hitting mechanics. If your message is, anything that it is, I just appreciate coaches that put content out there. And so I appreciate that you do that. And I have learned a lot from you as well, and working with your daughter, Jaden, who's got her camera turned off, which is, I don't understand, Jaden, why you have your camera turned off, but it's fine.
Yeah, she told me
So
she was going to do that.
it's fine. But yeah, anyway, I think so. Thank you for doing that, and for all the coaches in here. Like, don't be afraid to share your content. Like, there's no secrets in this sport. We're all, and even if you do have a secret, we're all gonna figure it out at some point anyway. So help as many people out as you can. I think that that's something that all coaches can benefit from. So
100%,
you do a great
100%.
job at that.
So you mentioned it and I mentioned it. How empowering does it feel, or is there any significance in your growth or feeling to be one of the first females in the Major League Baseball pipeline as a coach?
I mean, it's definitely validating for like all the the work that you put in, and kind of like I always think this was something that I could do. Like, if you would have asked me this 3 years ago and said, is this something that you think you could do, I probably would have said, yes, I do think this is something I could do, if given the opportunity. So when the opportunity came, obviously I jumped on it. But I'm kind of sick of the gender content about
Yeah.
it. It's like, and it's fine. Like, it's an important thing that we need to talk about right now. But I would just like to, when this is all said and done, be judged on whether or not I was a good coach, not whether or not I was a good female coach, just a good coach.
Right.
So
100%. I get that totally. Totally. So I know earlier this week or last week, you did a Zoom on some common swing flaws. Can you touch on some of that, or what are some common swing flaws in general that you see? And then can you break that down with the difference in those swing flaws for maybe the youth kids? Because I know we have a lot of youth players represented here as compared to elite high school and college players, and then what you're seeing at the
yeah,
professional level.
yeah, I think when we look at the most common swing flaw, if you're going to boil it down to anything, is a lack of strength. That's the most common swing flaw. And so when we watch a 10-year-old swing and their swing isn't perfect, it's because they're 10. It's not because they're doing this with their hands or doing this. It's just there's a lack of strength. And then so stability is one of those things. But then I think after that, the most common swing flaw in general is just timing. Like, and I'm not, being on time to hit for sure, but like, you have to load your body in a certain order too. And I think we pay attention to a lot of how to unload our body, like, and when you have 40, I have K-Vest, you use those things and it measures the unload of your body, right? It's like, oh, okay, well, your hips are going before your torso, and your torso is going before your arm, and your arm's going before your hand. And we all know that's the unload sequence, which is good. But how do we get there's a loading sequence too, I think. And so, and this is something I've started to pay attention to more lately, is if you are strong enough and if you are able to complete a movement, then you have to be on time with those movements. So like, we always have to start with the strength aspect of it and the mobility aspect of it. Sometimes it's flexibility, whatever, but I think you gotta like understand how to get a person to their launch position most efficiently and in a position that's repeatable. And so I think, like, in my opinion, like, the most common swing flaw is hitters load their upper body too early. So, for example, like, we need to unload our pelvis first, right? And then, so we need to unload our pelvis, but we also have to simultaneously be holding the load of our upper body, right? Our torso. And so, like, you'll see a lot of people when their foot comes down, like, they load their torso up really early. And then by the time their foot comes down, they're already losing that load of their upper body. So I think a later load of the upper body is optimal. I'm not gonna say it's gonna work for everybody, but I think that's something that I've been paying attention to, and you really realize like how the hitters that look quiet, they load their upper body, they just load it later. They load it on their way forward instead of loading it on their way backwards. So I think timing is probably the biggest one, and then after that, all the dominoes are gonna start to fall. Like, it's getting stuck on your backside, getting over lunging on your front side, your hands dropping, your front arm lengthening out. Those are all just dominoes that are a byproduct of your ability to load and unload your body.
That's awesome. That's really good. And I've noticed that we used to, when I was younger, calling it like carrying the hands, where you would load up early and then as you stride, your hands would go with the hands. And I mean, that's something that I see. And I don't know if I stopped watching it because my focus was on someplace else, but I notice that for sure when I see the elite guys hit. You know, everybody on Twitter is posting awesome gifs and slow motion stuff, and you see them. Like, you see the hands load late, you see the upper body load late, and then not only that, you see them hold that as they resist the upper body movement. And you can see that. I mean, I think about Mookie Betts, and I know that his movement profile is completely different than other people, but he's one that if you really watch, you can see the hips loaded and that upper body's just fighting the hips, and then everything snaps through.
Yeah.
And the point you made about getting to launch position efficiently and then being able to do that repeatedly on top of the timing of that, I love that. I wrote some notes here with, you said strength and mobility number one, then, and I'm just going to summarize it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but strength and mobility, then get them to move efficiently for their body, and then they have to learn to time that move.
Yeah, but the load is the part of the swing that we can control.
Yes.
Right? Like,
yes.
once you're unloading your body and you're moving fast, like, you've lost control. Like, you're not going to be able to control your body in a very, like, it's you're putting yourself in a position to do like, you're stretching the rubber band, but once you let it go, you don't really have a lot of control over where that rubber band goes, right? So we can control the loading process. And I think, so many times as a coach, and I did this for years, and I probably still do it way too much now, is like, we try to instruct once the turn begins. And it's like, that's the part that's the hardest to control, right? If you can put players in a better position when they start to begin their turn, then to me, that's the part that you can control and you can make repeatable. But that's the boring part of hitting that nobody wants to work on.
Yeah.
So, like, nobody wants to do hey, I need you to do, 2 sets of 10 of just you going through your stride, holding your launch position and making sure you're 50-50, this. Nobody wants to do that. They want to hit the ball.
Yeah.
And that's understandably so. But, the controlling the load, I think, is something that I've gained a greater appreciation about being around, especially in the baseball circle, the things you hear baseball people talk about. I've never heard anybody talk about in a softball circle about, like, your setup and your stance. Like, I was always taught that that's unique to you. Hey, whatever you want. And, like, every player, like, that's the first thing in baseball circles they seem to want to adjust, is like, he's got to have a better setup. And it doesn't matter what level you talk to. You talk to ex-big leaguers, you talk to current big leaguers, you talk to rookie coaches, you talk to rookie players. It's like, it's always like, well, because if you think about it, that's the part of the swing they can adjust. You can adjust your setup. That's the easiest part, and it really might put you into a better position. And so, at first you hear that and I'm like, why is everybody paying attention to setup and stance? And then you realize, like, if I need a guy to get to here, to their launch position, and they're in the position that they can't even start from, like, let's start there and then, do that. So I think those are things that I've just started to pay more attention to now, and especially in softball, like, everybody hits with an open stance. It's like blanket, like, everybody hits with an open stance. And I don't necessarily think that that's what's good for you. I think it's good for some. I don't think it's good for all.
Yeah, no, I notice every now and then Jaden will get closed off in her stance. And actually, sometimes I think she hits better when she gets a little closed off. It's completely dependent on mobility, strength, movement, and vision too. Because if you're closed off and your lead side eye is weak, that's probably not the best position for you. So, I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. And the setup, I forget who said it. They said you can't think and hit at the same time. Everybody knows that. But if you're going to think about a move when you're hitting, it's got to be your load in a game. Because once that happens, if you're thinking, then you're beat at the upper.
I think thinking about when to start is like, we always worry about when the foot's coming down. Are you getting your foot down on time? I've never seen someone in a game. I've never seen someone in a game take a game swing on one leg. I've never seen it, right? Their foot always seems to find a way to come down. So why are we so in a hurry to get them to put their foot? It's going to come down. Like, it has to, right? It has to stabilize you. So to me, it's like, when do you start your loading sequence? Do you start it early enough, or do you start it too early in some cases, right? When do you start your loading sequence? And then let the swing happen as it happens. Like, your foot's going to come down because you can swing harder on 2 feet than you can on one. So, like, it's going to come down. So let's not worry about getting your foot down. Let's worry about when essentially to get your foot up or when to start your loading sequence, right? I think those are things that you can easily pay attention to, especially when you're in the on deck circle or in the hole or something like that.
I was a big get my foot down early guy when I played, and there was so many times that would get stuck on my backside against a dude throwing 80 poo, and it would blow me up because I was in a bad position. And
Right.
even when I coached, the first few years that I coached, I was a get your foot down early guy, get your foot down early guy. And now I do the opposite. We play load, I call it load chicken. Like we'll crank the machine up and I'll be like, you're going to start your swing later and later every time until this ball just blows by you. And then we're going to let you step a little earlier, but we are going to step as late as possible to feel that move. I mean, once they control it, if they don't have any control of the move, then there's obviously certain things you have to do. But I mean, that's really good stuff right there. That's awesome.
Yeah. I like load chicken. I dig it.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, I do load chicken. So how are you seeing the same flaws with 12 through 15-year-olds as you're seeing now with minor league and major league players?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is like they have unlimited access. Like there's like I think we have 26 hitting coaches in the Cubs organization. So like they can potentially hear 26 voices. So for us it's really about like just it's almost like you got to save your bullets and use them when it's going to be actually effective. And that's something that I learned just we have such a great like Cubs hitting coach community, and we all talk to each other. We all do a Microsoft Teams call every Friday just to touch base and talk about things, and we all text each other, and people are amazing. And like you listen to them talk and it's like they have, and we all like it's all interchangeable. We all like, hey, you're on field 5 and you have double A players today, or you're on field 3 and you've got rookies today. And it's like, okay, so you have like a very big mix, and so you're going to get to work with eventually at some point somebody, and you don't want to go in there like guns blazing because you don't know if they've just heard that 5 different things from 5 different coaches 5 minutes ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to kind of like save your bullets. And I think that's something that I have learned is like do your research, do all the legwork, and then if they come to you, then you can have that bullet and put it in the chamber and shoot it and give them a knowledge bullet, right? And then you can sit there and say, hey, this is what I see. But you don't want to go in there and be like, and secondly, who the heck am I? I've been working for the Cubs for what, like a couple months? Like, who am I? And I'm going to come out there and be like, hey, you need to do this. Like, it might be the right thing to do, but if I lose them mentally, then I'm never going to get them back again. So you have to really like watch and let them come to you a little bit more. And I have heard that from like 10 different coaches. So I think there's probably something to that.
Yeah, I know that's Andy Haynes talked about that when we were in Chicago this fall. And I mean, Johansson's always telling me about that, and when I coached high school ball, that's what I did. I did not go in and I did not cookie cut anybody. I did not, kids would come to me and I literally told kids, you can't handle this. I'm not messing with your swing because mentally you can't handle it. Him, I'll work with. You, no, we're going to go do something else. Like we're going to put you on the machine and we're just going to let the environment or we're going to use constraints methods to train you, but you can't handle that. So that's awesome. It intrigues me. How is that culture built in the Cubs organization? Because I know talking to high school coaches that they have a hard time getting the same message across to 25 to 30 kids with 3 or 4 coaches. How are you doing that with all of the players in the Cubs organization and 26 coaches? How are you streamlining that message?
I mean, I think, the Cubs did a good job of hiring like-minded people, right? And then B, we're really transparent. Like, here's the data, dude. Like, we can all debate it but it's right here. And so I think that, the R&D department just does such a good job here of giving us everything that we need to analyze a player. And so, it's all there for us. And so I think it kind of checks us as coaches when we have this conversation with, other coaches. Hey, I think this, it's less of a, it's less of a who's winning the conversation as opposed to more of just a conversation. Hey, you're right. Why do you think that? Well, I was looking at this, this, and this, and you can kind of back these things up. And so I think the Cubs do a really good job of giving us those resources so that we don't just have this headbutting moments, and I'm sure they'll happen, right? Like, again, I worked instructional camp 1 and instructional camp 2, and then COVID-19 came and just screwed everything up. And like, but in the conversations that you have with people, it's like there's also like a hierarchy too. Like, if you have coaches that have been here for 10 years, like, I'm not going to walk up to them and be like, hey, this person needs to be doing this. It's going to be like, hey, it's going to be more of a question. I'm going to have a conversation with them. So I think the Cubs we do a really good job of we all have a growth mindset. We all want to learn from each other. And so I think it starts there. When you have coaches that want to be right all the time, I think that's just a growth mindset thing that, it gets a little blocked off in there.
Yeah. And I mean, I obviously don't know all the coaches, but I know some of them that were hired in the off season, and I've talked to some of them, and they're all great minds that are able to blend and synthesize both the science and the art of hitting, properly. And I mean, that's just boils down to culture. That's awesome. So a big question here. Can you address the myth of the softball swing being different than the baseball swing? Because for some reason it's 2020 and we're still having this debate.
Well, I mean, I'm going to go ahead and assume that if everyone's in this room, that they probably we don't really need to have this conversation, but like to the people outside, there's not really that much different. Like, the ball behaves in the last 15 feet almost identically in baseball and softball. So when the pitch comes in, yes, does it release from a different angle? Do your eyes have to be at a different spot? Yes. But in the last 15 feet, the angle of the ball on off-speed pitches and fastballs is remarkably similar. So matching pitch plane is really what we're after. We're trying to be on time. We're trying to match pitch plane. The swing really behaves the same. It's just about where your eyes are. And, I don't have the experience that like Rachel Balkovec has on the gaze tracking and all of that stuff, but I'm sure that there's, some science to how you pick the ball up too, that I need to probably go down that rabbit hole at some point. But yeah, it really isn't any different. Getting a hitter to move efficiently is getting a hitter to move efficiently. It doesn't really matter, especially when the angle of the ball is almost identical.
So for those that are coaching and have, parents or players that are resistant to that belief, do you think addressing that the last 15 feet, the ball moves identical is a good way to approach that to try to get some more buy-in?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like, how can you argue with that? Like, just seriously, like, just call up Chad Longworth and be like, hey, dude, do you have Rapsodo data on pitchers? And he'll be like, yep, I got a ton. And he'll give it all to you. And you can see how the ball behaves in the last 15 feet. Even the reaction time is almost exactly the same. I would actually think the reaction time is starting to shift in the other direction. It was always the belief back when softball was at 40 feet, when, us dinosaurs were in high school playing and it was at 40 feet. Were the reaction times like crazy? Yes. But I actually think it's starting to shift in baseball's direction now. Everybody throws 100. Everybody throwing fuzz now. So I don't really think we can even debate that anymore.
Right.
It's like, oh, well, Jenny Finch threw the equivalent of 100-mile-per-hour pitch. Well, yeah, guess what? Everybody throws 100 now. So it's the same now.
Somebody asked a question here that goes back to something that you addressed earlier. With the setup, is it based on the athlete's comfort, or how do you decide how a player should use a setup for their swing?
Yeah, I saw that in the chat. So like, this is a good question. I think you can kind of experiment a little bit with it. Whatever, to me, like the biggest killer of how you load efficiently is you can't have any back shift in your swing. Like you just can't. Like, you cannot take, like, I guess you can have a little bit, but I prefer you not to have any. So for example, like I used to hit really with like a really wide stance. Like I had like a very Albert Pujols like setup. Okay, super wide. And I was very simple, toe tap and go. Okay. Had I tried to leg kick from that position, from a wide position, I would have had so much sway back that I would have never been able to recover on the front side. So when you see hitters like a Cody Bellinger or a Mike Trout, and they start super upright and they move forward only, there's no back shifting. Even when they pick their leg up, they're not shifting back. They're kind of just loading that pelvis around the rear leg, right? How you do that, I think, is specific to every hitter. So, like, to answer your question, like, play around with whatever you have to do to get them loaded at launch and not back shifting. Those are like the two things in their setup. As far as with their hands, like upper body wise, so I was talking just feet and like lower body and how you stand. Upper body wise, I already said it. Like, I'm a big fan of loading your upper body later. So, you know, if you have hitters that start with their hands like really high, that's fine as long as they're not getting them loaded. Same thing if you have a hitter start with their bat on their shoulder. That's fine as long as they're not on their shoulder and already loaded, or, you know, something like that. Just some sort of looseness to their upper body. But yeah, I think softball is like the most generic. Everybody has an open stance. They want no strides or very little strides, and everyone has the bat on their shoulder. And it's like, why? Like, why don't we explore more from that? So, because you can load on your way forward. Like, I think people assume that everything's loading on your way back. You can load on your way forward. And so, like, if I have to pick my foot up and I go right away, that's fine. Then I'm going to have to find a more efficient way so that I don't rush or lunge or do something like that. So you just kind of have to play with it. I think I gave a very vague and long answer and didn't.
No,
really
that was great, because you set up a couple questions that I have now that right off of that. One, because you've mentioned it a couple of times, loading the upper body early. I mean, we're probably going to lose it early, so we're going to be out of sequence in our swing. For kids that do that, or athletes, no matter what age, do you have, what are your suggestions to fix that other than strength, or is it just a strength issue, do you think?
So, no, I think, I mean, it's a strength issue for sure. So, like, you can load your upper body early if you're really strong. So, like, because you're going to be able to hold on to it a lot longer, right? So, like, you know, when you watch, like, again, when you watch like a Mike Trout, right? He loads his upper body early, but look at Mike Trout. He looks, you know, he's huge. Like, he's jacked. The dude is super strong. And, you know, it's like, so you can do it, but it's really, really hard to hold on to it. So what the like terminology I like to use, especially when I'm talking to younger players. So, like, if you picture your load as like, I'm in my stance doing nothing as 0, and my launch position is 10, and you think of that as like a timeline, I tell the younger the kid, I tell them, load your scap or pull your elbow back or whatever phrase you want to use at about 7 or 8. So, like, they shouldn't engage that upper body until just before their foot's about to come down. And so that way you can see those two kind of, it's like they'll move together, and then right at the last minute, you'll see them pull apart. And I think that's where you're going to, at least, they're probably still going to lose it early during the turn because there's a lack of strength, but they'll at least get something out of it, right? And then if you have like a high school player or maybe like a college player even, and you can get them to load that upper body a little bit later, they're going to be able to hold on to it a little bit longer and therefore get the benefits of separation. So I don't really have a ton of like data to support that yet. Just so we're all clear, that's just from observations I can see of like just being able to create some separation. Actually, I have some KVS data that supports that on the younger level. I don't have any data to support that at the pro level.
Do you think bat tips, you know, when you're lifting your front leg, do you think bat tips would help delay that for younger kids that are weaker? Do you have any ideas on other cues or tricks that may help them feel that better?
Yeah, I'm a fan of anything you can do to create a feel, right? Like, anything you can do to create the desired result. And I'm gonna be honest, like, when I was a kid, I wanted to swing like Ken Griffey Jr. because he had the most swag in his swing of all time. So, like, you give me I wish that I was like a loose mover so I could swing like Javi Baez or, you know, something like that. But I'm not. That's just not how I move. So my bat gets like very minimal, simple. I have a simple short swing that everyone is like, oh, see how short and how simple her swing is? Yeah. But I'm also like, I mean, my torso mobility is like zero. Like I'm the tightest mover of all time. So like, yeah, like I'm the tightest mover of all time. So you ask me to bat tip, I can't hold that position for very long because I don't have the mobility to do it. And so like, you have these things, like I also have really, really, really terrible internal rotation of my shoulders. Like if you try to get me to grab my hands behind my back, like the bottom hand like makes it to like where my belly button would be on the front. Like it won't go any higher. So I have no internal rotation. So I can't tip a bat. I can't hold this position. It sucks. It hurts. So immediately, like, what does the bat want to do? It wants to go right back to where it came from. So like for me, it doesn't work, right? No matter how much I want it to work, because I just think like I would.
Awesome.
Yeah, it still looks awesome, right? So yeah, anything you can do to create a feel, yeah. But if it can't be blanket and it can't be universal, because there are some kids that just like physically can't do it, like me. So
when you were talking about, you just mentioned mobility and tight movers, loose movers. When you're talking about stance, wide versus narrow, talking about the move forward, not swaying back, how much of an impact, or how much of an impact does mobility have in that? Should tighter guys or girls be possibly wider? Should looser movers have a more narrow stance so they can have a bigger move? What's your thoughts on that?
There's a lot of moving parts to it. Like if you have a lot of hip mobility, typically your stride's going to be bigger. And when your stride is bigger, I'm a fan of starting narrower. That way your move is simpler, right? So to get from A to B, it's a shorter distance than having to go from here all the way back and then all the way back out again, right? So if you have a lot of hip mobility, typically, and I say this typically because there's always outliers and I don't want to ruin anybody's, swing, but you're going to start a little bit more narrow because as you stride out, your pelvis your legs are going to stretch against your pelvis. But if you have the more mobility you have, you're going to need to you're really going to need to get there. And then as far as like loose or tight on your upper body, that's more so going to be the move that you make with your torso. So you're going to see looser movers, they're going to get more inward turn with their torso. And they're probably going to need to hit the ball deeper. They're probably going to need to hit the ball opposite field. And so like when I think of hitters that hit the ball really well oppo, but didn't really pull the ball all that well, like David Freese comes to mind. He played for the Cardinals for a while. And like a lot of his home runs were to right center and center field, but he didn't pull a lot of home runs, right? And Javi Baez is the same way. He hits a lot of balls opposite field. And I just disclaimer, I have not gotten to work with Javi Baez. So don't think like I'm, trying to tell you how Javi Baez swings. Like I've seen the dude hit in the cage. You should see him hit left-handed. It's pretty magical. It's phenomenal. He's just as good left-handed as he is right-handed. It's phenomenal. But but you see like the data says that, 60% of his home runs go to like right center field. And that's a big number. And so like you can see those hitters that get a bigger turn, the looser moving hitters that are going to do that. You know what I'm saying? And so like, it just kind of depends. Like if you're going to have a bigger inward turn, then I would give you as little gather as possible, because what are you going to do when you gather? You're going to turn immediately. So it's like, okay, then let's just take the gather out and think more like a Cody Bellinger type setup, right? Where you're just standing upright and you only load on your way forward. You have a limited amount of time so you can take advantage of not getting too far inwardly turned and stuff. So I think it just kind of depends. There's so many moving parts to it. That's why experimentation is so key for that.
Yeah. And you started doing more movement assessments 2 or 3 years ago, right? Is that about when you started to do?
About 2 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. It's a big part of it because it's just a piece of the puzzle. There's obviously no like, oh, this kid moves this way, he's got to swing that way. But it really allows you to get into how a player moves and like what's going on. And then you can couple that with a lot of other things, very simple things that even youth and middle school and high school coaches can do. So if you do a movement assessment and you have a bat sensor and you see a kid, is a loose mover and he's hitting the ball to right field, and you can look at the bat sensor, and he's got really good rotational acceleration and early connection, then you know, hey, this is where you need to kind of focus your swing on. Whereas, like, I think one of the things that really harmed me, not to talk about myself too much, but I tried to go to the other way because I couldn't. So I was always working on going the other way, and I was a good pull hitter. That's what I was good at. And I think that really was one of the things that harmed me along my development was trying to focus on that. I just never felt comfortable doing it. As far as movement assessments go, I've talked to some coaches, high school coaches, and they're reluctant to put them in because they say they just take up too much time. What are some simple assessments that they can familiarize themselves with that they can do quickly, right into practice? They see a kid doing something, boom, we can put a kid through this in 3 minutes or less. I mean, what movement assessments do you think would be really beneficial for those coaches to use?
That's a good question. So one of them would be a torso rotation test. So like just have them sit in a chair, back is off of the chair, so they sit at the front of the chair, have them put a bat behind, and you got to stand like directly in front of them, and then have them lock their hips. So I usually have them put like their right foot over their left foot and keep their feet on the ground, and then turn. And so you see how far they rotate, and don't look at the bat because they can manipulate the bat, but just look at how many degrees this rotates. So like for me, if I sit here and I turn, you can see I turn like 40 degrees maybe, right? And so same thing to the left side's even stiffer. Like you're going to have kids that turn like 80 degrees. And so that's immediately like the looser people, they're going to have that big wind up in their swing because they know they need to swing fast, and their body's going to do whatever it takes to do that. That's one of them. Another one I do is like a hip rotation test. So I just have them put one foot flat on the ground, the other toe right next to their heel, hands on their hips, turn left, turn right. So turn both directions. And same thing, like you're going to see kids where you're like, and they'll jump out at you, like one kid will turn and you're like, can you turn anymore? I'm like, no, I can't turn anymore. And it's like, okay, then they're really, really tight. And so their move with their lower body, like don't give them a lot of movement on their lower body because they can't do it. They can't complete the movement. And then you're going to see kids that are like Gumby and they just turn forever. And you're just like, wow, and so then you're going to have to manipulate, the swing on that one. Those are, the rest of them a lot of them are strength based. I like to use an overhead squat just to see if you can address some hip issues that way too, hip and knee, and you can address ankle mobility that way. So to give you an example of what you do with your overhead squat, you just make sure their arms are at 90 degrees. So it's not like a weight room overhead squat, but more like you're just at 90 degrees, sticks on top of your head, put it here and have them perform an overhead squat with their feet facing forward. And so if their heels can stay down, they can go all the way down and keep the stick over their head, stay past. Like that's a really good mover. And I remember this because when Jaden was doing it, when you came to the shop and I was showing her how to do it, and you were like, because I could do it, and you were like, wow, that's a complex movement. I can't believe you could do that. And it's like, it's hard, but like if you practice it enough, like how many assessments have I given at this point, right? You get good at it because you have to show people to do it. And so, if your toes turn out, your hips are usually pretty tight. If your heels can't stay down and you can't get to full depth, you might have some ankle mobility. And then you can also do the same squat with your hands behind your head. So you don't need something overhead. The overhead just really tells you if you have like your shoulder flexion and your upper back has, you have thoracic extension and stuff, but you can do it with your hands behind your head and let them lean forward. And then you can assess if they've got some full depth, because one of the things, like, Jake, I see you on the chat with your force plate. One of the things we've seen on the force plate, and this is while I was working at Elite Baseball, is hitters that spike the back plate, like they're pushing off of their back foot, typically have they have timing issues because obviously you're pushing off of your back foot and you're getting way too far forward. But secondly, you probably have a lack of ankle mobility. And so like if you can't hold your ankle in dorsiflexion, and it, like to a certain extent, like you're going to rush out of it because once you sink into that back hip, your body's going to panic and throw you right out of that. And so you're going to see a lot of timing issues with that. But ankle mobility can be improved quite a bit, actually. So that one's an easy one to attack in your like warm-ups and stuff. But it's an important one to know. They're like the big three.
Yeah, I love the overhead squat because it brings out all the bad movers like immediately.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you have absolutely no posterior chain, or you live on your backside and you cannot use your anterior core at all. You just arch up and hold it that way. And
Yep.
the ankle stuff is phenomenal. I love when Tommy talks about ankle mobility on Twitter. I mean, his
Do
stuff.
you have to get Google Translate out to translate Tommy's stuff because he's so smart? And I'm like, I'm a history major, Tommy. Like, I gotta tell me like head, shoulders, knees, and toes. You know, not like cranium. You know, all this. He uses like the big. He's so smart, though. I love him. I went to college with him.
Really?
Yeah, he played baseball at Marshall when I played softball at Marshall. I think we're the same class.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we knew each other in college. He's great.
Oh, he is. I send his stuff to my dad, and my dad's like, "Yeah, you're gonna have to explain this to me." He like just does. It's funny but yeah, I'll screenshot his stuff because I'm like, oh man, I got to look into that because that's something I haven't thought about since I was in undergrad when I was taking like, AP2 or something like that, and I'm like he has that stuff it's rolling off his tongue, and I've got to process that. He said something today he was talking with Patrick Jones on Twitter today about, side bend and vertical bad angle and stuff. And I was like, oh my God, like this is a whole Zoom talk right now, Tom. Like I could literally talk an hour just about this one swing on this one changeup that Reese Hoskins just made.
He's great. Tommy's so smart. I'd love some baseball organization's going to snatch him up and they're going to be lucky.
Yeah, I remember when you told me to follow him and I was like, yeah, this he's legit. He's great. You talked about back foot. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Like the interaction with the back foot into the ground and how that holds everything and how that allows us to be just adjustable and how mobility plays a part in how much power what that foot's gonna do to create power. Like when my 8-year-old daughter Lexi swings, I don't even let her move her foot off the ground because they call her Flexi Lexi in gymnastics, and like she holds her back foot on the ground and like complete rotation of the hips without even trying, and she pulls it off, and when she pulls it off, everything just flies away from home plate. So can you address some of that?
Yeah. So think of your back leg as an anchor. Okay. So you want to have that anchored to the ground through your heel as long as possible as you move forward. So I think the best way I've heard it described, I think Joey Cunha said it, is imagine your body peeling your back heel off of the ground as it moves. So your back leg is stuck into the ground through your heel, and you want to move away from that heel. So when your foot is going to be, down like this, your heel's on the ground. As you move forward, your foot's going to turn in this way, but you're still going to have pressure on your heel. At least you should. And so what that does, if you're a loose mover, like Flexi Lexi or George Springer, right? They can complete their swing, back foot stays on the ground, heel comes up, and then it probably slams right back down, okay? And then you're going to have a hitter like me, where my back foot would come this far off the ground when I swung, and it would scoot forward, right? So you look at that and you watch a hitter, move their back foot, and you're like, see, they're driving off of their back leg. And it's like, be careful with that. They're not driving off their back leg. Their hip is pulling that leg. So the whole swing always starts from the middle. And so, I went down a really cool rabbit hole one day, and I don't remember where I found this, but because I like to give credit, but I can't remember where I found this. But there was a video of a man with no arms and no legs. Okay, so he was born with a genetic defect and he had no arms and no legs, but he could still walk. And so he had like nubs for legs, right? And he had nubs for arms, but he could still walk because his pelvis could go up and down and move his nubs, right? And so what's really moving our legs? Is it our legs? Or is all the action starting from the ground, or is it starting from the middle? And when you see that happen, you see that like we probably just grew legs evolutionary wise to make our pelvis move faster, but our legs don't start the swing. Like we look at that and we think that our legs are going to do what our they need to do to support the pelvis and the spine. Like that's what's going to happen. So when you think about turning your hips really, really fast, your front leg's going to push into the ground and support you and allow that to happen. Do you need to cue it sometimes? Like, do you need to push harder through your front leg? Yes, every once in a while. But if you're going to think of your legs as like putting force into the ground, there's not really a whole lot of force on the back leg. And when I say that, I mean, like, if you could picture you standing on one leg, on your back leg, that's 100% of your body weight. And then if you jumped up and down and put force on your back leg, that's going to spike. That's going to be over 100% of your body weight in terms of force, how much force you're putting into the ground. Your force level on your back leg really, really stays at about 100% the whole time in a swing. But the front plate can almost double your body weight in how much force you're putting down. So if you really want to think about how much force you're putting into the ground, think about how much force you're going to put with your front leg as opposed to what you're putting with your back leg. We're not pushing off of our back leg. That's not why someone's back foot moves or doesn't move. It's really a mobility issue.
Yeah, I think, and I could be wrong, but you probably saw, if it was a baseball person, Joey Myers probably posted that picture of the guy with no legs because he's huge into the anatomy trains, which talks about
it might have been Joey Myers, yeah.
Yeah, so if you guys are interested in that, there's a book called Anatomy Trains that I'm putting in. It's pretty expensive, and there's a couple. But it talks about, all the fascial systems in the body and how that fascial system actually provides us with more of the rubber band effect than our muscles do. And I've not read Anatomy Trains. I've seen parts of it, and it's very good. I don't know if I buy into the whole thing that they talk about in that book, but that's an excellent book. You talking about, I'm going to just ask a question and then you can correct me if I'm wrong. You talked about people teaching driving that back knee, which is something that I used to teach a long time ago and I've gotten away from. But I know when we're working with pitchers, and Ben Brewster talks about this all the time, that's also a mobility issue too, because if you have extremely good external rotation on your back hip, you're going to hold that heel into the ground longer and it's not going to turn. That back leg's not going to turn. If you have very limited external rotation, but you have really good internal rotation on that back leg, it might appear that the knee might appear to be driving forward earlier. So that's a whole nother thing with that mobility stuff. That's why it's extremely important. And somebody asked the question, what are some good resources where coaches can find more information on movement assessments?
On Base U is pretty good. It's a pretty basic version that I think they do a really good job of explaining things in terms of how to assess your hitters. And then I know Elite Baseball, they'll come to you and teach you their assessment. That's the assessment that I use. They're similar. You can also do FMS. FMS will tell you a lot. Functional Movement Systems. I think that's what that stands for, right? FMS.
Yeah.
And so you can do all three of those are very valuable assessments. And they really will help you like just kind of understand how the human body moves, specifically for each player. But like, be careful when you do assessments. And I tell this to everybody, there's assessments and like, especially On Base U does this and Elite Baseball does this. And we have tests that we say pass, fail. Okay. Fail doesn't mean you're bad. And we need to get better at that. All it means is you can't do this specific movement that we're testing for that day, but it tells me something about your body. So when you do this and when you go to like On Base U and you go to these conferences, they're great, but like if someone has tight hip mobility, that doesn't mean that they're not going to swing good. Like it doesn't. That might be the reason why someone is good. Like I look back at it's so funny because like when you coach, you always look back at your career like you do, Kyle. And I had a lot of success as a player, like a lot. I'm not the coach that's like, well, I was no good as a player, so I'm going to go and coach. Like I had a lot of success as a player, but I look back at it now and I'm like, dang, I got lucky. Right? Like my movement profile, the style of swing that I chose, and the fact that not one person that I ever got coached by tried to change anything about my swing is why I ended up being good. I got lucky. Right? And so like now we can sit there and we can like, okay, well, I know, okay, I was a tight mover. I had tight hips and a tight, upper body. I'm not stiff. I can move a little bit, but I'm tight. Right? So then I know if I have someone who has the same movement profile as me, then they can swing like me, right? And where I have the swing that every softball coach loves. I have it. Very wide setup, toe tap, very small movement, very little upper body movement. That was my swing, right? So everyone's like, oh yeah, she has the magic swing. Well, no, I have the magic movement profile. And so I tweeted about this like probably a year ago. And I'm like, so I run everyone at my facility through my movement assessment. And I've done the tests myself. And I'm like, wow, you know how many people have the same movement profile as me? Less than 5%.
Really?
Less than 5%. So that simple softball swing that everybody wants to coach is going to work for about, well, in my small sample size, right? It would work for less than 5% of my hitters. So literally there was three hitters that it worked for. So I'm like, okay. And you look at it and you're like, okay, well, that makes sense. That's why it's so like, we coach a lot of this stuff out of our kids. Our kids will figure this out, and we coach a lot of it out of them. You know, like I figured that out on my own. Nobody told me to do that. I just figured it out. And so, but you know, if I had been a looser mover, I probably would have had all that bat tipping, swag, swinging, because I would have tried. I would have tried. I would have tried.
And for the coaches, that on base U is awesome. And the reason I love on base U is, I mean, and I've gotten away from this purposely, but I like lists. Like I always want to ask Josh Johnson, can you give me a list to look at for softball pitchers? Because I'm not comfortable with softball pitchers. And Josh has been awesome because like he's like in my ear all the time, dude, it's just the same as baseball pitching. And you understand that. Like it's the same. And I'm like, it's not the same, but it really is. But on base U breaks it down, and they have like, I think it's 13 swing flaws, and they break it down exactly what it is, and they talk about all the movement inhibitors and how to fix it. And it just, coaches and teachers like lists because we're people that like to have a goal and we like to meet that goal and move on. So on base U is tremendous. My beef with FMS is a lot of FMS movement is functional, but you can work with a kid in 20 minutes and teach him how to pass the FMS if he failed everything. Like that's, and FMS can really be done in a dynamic warm-up. Like Nick Showman and I talk about this all the time. Like we'll assess kids and then we use our warm-up to assess them. Like, are they getting better? You can see that if your warm-up's designed the right way. Yeah. So I really like on-base U. TPI is another great one. And I know Johansson likes TPI a lot because it's not biased towards baseball movement. It's more, it's a non-biased approach to assess the same things. So those are all great.
Yeah, to give everyone in here a good kind of some context, my TPI and On Base U are the same company. TPI is just Titleist Performance Institute. It's geared towards golf, and On Base U is their like branch off into the baseball world, and they do it for their. I think they're going to start doing it for softball pitchers too.
Yeah. Yep. Softball, baseball.
Yeah.
And I don't want to misquote them, but I think we have. So I think Ohio only has like 2 or 3 on-base U certified people, and one of them works at our facility. And he said he can go to any on-base U they offer now, pretty much for free. Now that he did the training.
Pretty cool.
So yeah, if you're coaching baseball and softball, or you're working with pitchers, hitters, it's definitely something that's worthwhile to do. Kurt Malott here, one of my favorite people. Awesome coach from Tiffin, about 15 miles away from me. He's got a question. What are your thoughts on vision training, weighted bats, balls, and training for bat speed?
So vision training, I'm not a person that is like, an expert in that area, but I can tell you that you need to incorporate velocity in your training. I think that is a really, really big thing that we leave out in terms of training is we train at coach speed, not game speed. You go to a lesson and you do your underhand flips and the kid leaves and they feel great. And then they come to you the next week and mom and dad are yelling at you, why can't you hit like that in a game? And it's like, well, because they didn't train like a game. So I think from a vision, a cognitive standpoint, you have to see velocity. And then I think that there are apps that you can do like pitch recognition wise. I know Kyle just wrote U-Hit's really good. Game Sense is pretty good for pitch recognition. There's all kinds of things you can do that. And then I like to overdo things. So, I'm like the my poor players that play and come to practice, but like I like to throw, like if I'm using a pitching machine and I throw like a light flight, I'll throw a light flight through the machine. So if let's say we're working on curveballs or drop balls that day, the light flight will make the movement like ×8. And so, but it doesn't break their bat in the process. And, you know, so it makes it a little bit harder. I like to throw blitz balls to incorporate some extra movement. And then as far as weighted bats and balls, I'm a big fan of overload and underload training, both in the bat and the ball. Don't forget the underload one. I think that's a big one. That's why PVC pipes are really good. You can swing them really fast, and it teaches your body to move really fast. And you know, so one of my favorite things to do too is I like to go heavy bat, light ball as well. So I like to do like a heavy bat with a wiffle ball or a heavy bat with a light flight, because then the hitter has to decelerate their body as opposed to relying on the ball to do it for them. That one I started to get really into right before I left to come to Arizona with some kids, especially if you do like some check swing stops, you know, like stop at contact swings, and you have a heavy bat with a light ball. That ball is not going to slow the bat down for them, so you really have to use your body to do it. And then for mental training, I think the best way to teach mental training is to make your training environment competitive, and then you can walk your kids through that. You can see how they respond in a competitive environment, and then you can kind of train them through that. So, you know, instead of just like, hey, here's what we're going to do to practice today, here's your ground balls, and then you wait for someone to make an error and then they get all down on themselves and then you go talk to them. That's like, to me, that's being responsive. Be proactive in, okay, well, here's what we're going to do at practice today. And we're going to hit you 25 ground balls. And if we're going to see who gets the most. And now you're competing at practice. And so now you get to see how they compete. And then you've already prepared them for the fact that they're going to compete, instead of waiting for them to react when they feel like they messed up or when they do well. So I think, you know, anytime you can incorporate competition at practice, and, you know, I heard Rachel Balkovec talk about this, like we've all been to those practices as players where a coach is like, hey, we're going to play a game today. And everyone goes nuts, and then they get super competitive, and it's like the most fun practice ever. And then it's like, well, why don't we do that more often? Right? So just compete at practice more often. Like have something that you compete with every single day, and then the kids will learn how to compete every single day. And I think that's the best mental training you can provide. And then I'm going to go back to, because I know Jake asked a question, back to force plates.
Oh, sorry, Jake. I didn't see that. My bad.
No, you're good. Yeah, I was trying to get like to a good segue where I could incorporate it.
Yeah.
How do you get players to increase torque if that's the vector they need to improve? Play with. Well, first I should say, are you talking about back foot torque or front foot torque? You can turn your mic on, I think, and tell us.
I'm talking about front foot torque.
Front foot torque. So if you're thinking about, I would play around with foot position. Have them stride across their body, have them stride open, have them land open, have them land closed, and you'll find pretty quickly what's the most efficient position for them in terms of torque. But I think you're going to find hitters that are naturally stride across their body have higher torque numbers anyway, because as soon as you stride across your body, that front leg is going to get torqued on more than and instead of vertical or horizontal force. So I would go back and look at all the hitters that you have that have high torque numbers. They probably stride across their body. So if you need to improve torque position, I would just say play with the position of your front foot. That would be my
Can you explain to everybody what the torque measurement on the force plate is measuring? So
we have three. The force plate that we use, I'm talking in terms of what I've used with Elite Baseball now. Okay,
you guys use Vertec, right?
We use a Vertec force plate. So there's three ways that you can measure front leg force. So you can measure it horizontally, which is basically like your ability to like stop your forward move, right? You can measure it vertically, which is how much force you're pushing into the ground. And then you can measure torque, which is how much spin or how much turn force you're putting into the ground. So typically you see hitters that are good in 2 out of 3. Usually, good horizontal force means that they stop their front foot really well. Wider or bigger striders or hitters that start with a wider position. Sorry, there's a really loud truck going by right now. I don't know if you guys heard that. So if you start with a wider position, you're going to have a higher horizontal number. If you start with a more narrow position and you move to a wide position, you're going to obviously have a little bit more momentum that you need to stop vertically. And then torque you're going to see a high torque number for hitters that naturally stride across their body.
Those are the hitters that are probably going to have more of the back foot's going to kick back reciprocally from the action of the stride across the body. You watch the videos of, and he doesn't do it all the time, but there's some good videos of Altuve doing that, especially on high balls.
Yep.
Where he's getting a nice kickback. Another good example is watching like hockey players hit slap shots really hard because they stabilize on that front leg. Like I'd love to see the numbers on that with a force plate.
I know.
Compared to baseball players. That legendary coach from Minnesota Duluth, Jen Walter, asked about. Thank you for attending, Jen. I feel like I'm in royalty here. I feel pretty excited.
She's awesome.
Wants to know how you can train deceleration, especially within the hips. And can you tie that into like what you would see on a motion capture graph with a good deceleration movement or sequence?
Yep. So front leg force is going to be the biggest aid to decelerate your hips. So the more force you put through your front leg, the faster your hips are going to stop. And I'm talking like the speed of your front leg. So we might see the front leg get straight, but if it gets straight after contact, it's putting force into the ground, but it's doing it at a very low rate of force production. So we want to see a really high rate of force development. And so that means how instant is your front leg hitting the ground and going. So that's usually the biggest determinant of it. The other one, like to help with like especially pelvis stability and deceleration, would be like play around with like what we were just talking about, like stride open and then stride closed, and watch your hitters behave in both of those. And you'll notice their hips will stop faster when they stride across their body for sure. And it might not be the optimal movement for them, but at least you can create that feel a little bit. Another one I like to use is like feed the flaw. I talked about this on the other Zoom call that we had with common swing flaws. Is like if you have a hitter that's spinning open too early, maybe tie a band around their hips, like loop it around their waist, and then have something that connects to their front hip that wants to pull their front hip out. So maybe tie it to something behind them, and it wants to pull it that way, and they have to work harder to keep it closed and keep it stable. And then in a K-vest, like if you're looking at it in a K-vest or 4D motion, you're going to see the graph go up like this, and then you're going to see the graph almost in a good graph. You're almost going to see that graph zero out before the contact line. So if your hips should not be moving at contact, your hips have already, they've started, they've stopped. The energy has been passed on to other parts of the body. And so when you look at it on a K-vest graph, if this is your contact line, like when, timeline, this is contact, your hip line is going to go up, and a good hip line is going to come all the way back down by contact. A bad hip line will come up, and then it'll come down, and the contact line will be in the middle of that decel. And those are usually the hitters that have like that sliding front hip or the bent front leg, or just, maybe they were adjusting to a changeup. But yeah, that's a really good question, because I think deceleration is pretty key to hitting. Your torso should almost be zeroed out too. When you watch hitters that they look like they never stop turning because they swing so fast, if you slow them down, their torso will turn, and there will be a stall in their shoulders, and you can almost feel the energy flow out through the arms, and then it picks back up again at the end. And so you'll watch them in real time, it looks like they never stop turning, but that stall of their shoulders is actually the deceleration of the torso.
How can coaches without 4D or access to motion capture or K-vest, do you have any suggestions on how they can look for that to assess that in players if they want to make it better? What's the best way they can do that without motion capture or force plates?
I would just watch, and like when you're watching a hitter, we got slow motion video on our iPhones and Android phones. Watch their belly button and how it behaves as they get to contact. So like if their belly button is pointed at the pitcher and they're making contact over here, they didn't decel, right? They never stop. They're just spinning open and then trying to make up for it with their arms. You're usually going to see a lengthening of the front arm or something. So I like to watch the belly button. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if their belly button is pointed at the ball, but their, torso is way ahead of their body, now you're going to know that the energy didn't flow properly. There was some gaps there because they started their swing from the upper body instead of the lower body. So yeah, I that's a good question too, because not everybody's got a $6,000 K vest and just at their disposal. But yeah, I watched the video. Like the belly button should basically stop right on where they make contact with the ball before they hit the ball, and you should see that kind of like stop and then watch everything pass it.
That's really important. I remember reading a while ago, somebody had numbers on Andrew McCutcheon's hip rotation, and they were comparing it to like a 10-year-old girl's and saying they're the same speed. But what's the difference is he stops it immediately, and he's able to transfer the force where, the 10-year-old spins it fast and they just keep spinning all the way around. And, some coaches will coach that out of kids. They'll coach them, oh, you can't have that kickback, when that kickback is what is stopping that hypermobile kid
right
from just spinning around the ball. And that's where his power is coming from. And then, as you said, and Chad Longworth says all the time, we coach it out of them.
Yeah, of course. And I think too, like, keep in mind when we're watching swings in real time, the only things we can really see are the beginning and the end. We can't see the middle. The middle gets blurry. And so when we see the end, we see this funky end. What's up, Lexi?
Say hi.
We see the end of these swings and they look funky. And then we're like, well, you must have did something wrong. Well, it's like, maybe not. Maybe that's just how they need to move. I was in a Zoom call and I had a female baseball player, and she's like, are there any drills for me to stop my back foot from coming off the ground? And I'm like, well, why do you want to stop your back foot from coming off the ground? Right. Like, right. I don't know. I'm not going to assess you, but like, you might not need to. That might just be how your body behaves. And so like, let those things happen naturally. You're not all going to look the same. It's just not going to happen.
I don't want to take up too much of your time. I want to be respectful, but I got two more questions that I want to definitely ask.
I could do this all day, Kyle. We're good.
Okay, so could I. I know some of the feedback I've gotten from the talks that I've done is it seems things are geared more towards elite players or high-level players, or, us having access to motion capture and things like that. Why is it important for a youth coach, a middle school coach, a high school coach to know this data and know what all of this means? Why is that important, and how can they scale that information to their players or to what they want to accomplish with their teams?
Oh, this is so important. This is like the most important question ever. Our job as coaches is to know this stuff and then communicate it to our players. So like if the information is out there, it is our responsibility to know what it is. It is. And so if we don't understand it, like ask questions, like there is still so much stuff that I have access to right now that is so over my head. Guess what? Ask questions, right? Ask questions until you understand it. And then it's not about telling a hitter, hey, I need you to improve your angular hip velocity. That's what I need you to do today, right? Like that's not what we're here for. That's not our job. Our job is to take the information, digest it, and package it into something that they can understand. But we have to know it. And the reason why I think so many people don't want to know this stuff is because it holds you accountable, because now you have to figure out how to train it. And you can't just sit there and say, oh, well, I know hitting because I've been around hitting for 30 years and that's what the good hitters do. It's like, no, we actually know that now. We can actually measure it. And so go out there and seek the information, be an information seeker. You don't have to take everything you learn and, send it in an email to your players. You just have to understand it at a level that you can now coach it to the players. And then when you figure out what all this stuff means, then you got to figure out how to train it. And you have to make it actionable. And so, part of my biggest problem with a lot of the Zoom calls that go on right now is everybody wants to talk theory, but nobody wants to talk about anything actionable. It's like
application, right?
It just drives me nuts. It's like we'll talk for an hour and everyone will nod their heads like, yeah, that's right. And then as soon as the call's over, the first thing I do is I get a text message or an email. hey, do you have any drills that I can work on to do this? And it's like, okay, well then let's give them drills. Let's give them the stuff that's
Right.
actually actionable,
Correct.
that you can do. And so I think that, that's why I love what we're doing here today. But yeah, I think that's our job as coaches, is take that information and then we have to make it actionable so that we can actually make kids better instead of just talking about it. We love to talk about stuff.
I've coached 3-year-olds up through college players, and I've worked individually with some minor league players, and I've coached 5 different sports, and I can tell you the hardest kids to coach and to communicate with are the littlest ones, because you have to know it. So, and I teach elementary phys ed. I teach 5-year-olds all day long. Like I teach 5 to 10-year-olds all day. And it's still, coaching 8U softball last year was extremely difficult because you have to pare all the information down from the entire game. And, and the expectation is, well, you're a baseball guy or you're a baseball girl or a softball girl, a guy, you need to teach my kid all this stuff, in 2 practices a week through a 6-week period. And you have to know that stuff. You're right. It's 100%. And the theory part of that and applying it is where, I think a lot of coaches, they get befuddled in that area. And that's why they don't want, you said it holds them accountable, but I also think some of them are like, how do I implement all of this into my program? And the answer is not to implement all of it. When I coached, I tried to do 1 or 2 new things a year. And if it didn't work, we scrapped it and we did something else. If it did, we had a foundation of that to build on something else the next year. I mean, right. So Casey, our buddy Casey, another phenomenal baseball mind that I am honored to have here.
Awesome.
He's asks, stride to open foot strike or release the stride foot to open after contact.
Regarding front foot torque. Casey, turn your mic on and explain yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have a force plate, but you were talking about front foot torque earlier, and I was just wondering whether front foot torque is something that we want or something that we don't necessarily need to worry about. Because if you stride to closed, you're going to get more front foot torque. If you stride the front foot open, with the pelvis in line, obviously, but stride that front leg open like you're throwing, you're going to get a lower number on a force plate, I would imagine. What is it that we're looking for?
Okay, now I got it. Yeah, you're right though. But I guess if you do have a hitter though that does stride across their body and they don't have a high torque number, that number needs to be high, right? Like we know that. And then but is it essential? No, that's why 2 out of the 3 vectors are usually what you see, but there are hitters that are elite in all 3. And typically those are hitters that they're just really, really ridiculously strong and stable. And so when that front foot does get dug into the ground, it punches into the ground, you get vertical force, it stops your horizontal force, and it's twisting and turning. If you have a ton of stability, you won't see that front foot kind of release and open up, like where that foot rolls on the ankle. But you'll see it's rare, but you can see a hitter that's elite on all 3. But for the most part, you're usually going to see 2 out of 3 depending on their mobility or stride style. So that's a good point. It's not, I would rather see your horizontal force and your vertical force and the rate of force production be higher on a neutral strider or an open strider. But if you're stepping across, that torque number better be high because you have to be using something.
Can I add just one more way?
Yeah.
Okay. I understand that the main job of the front leg is to stop the front hip from continuing to move forward. What I've been teaching a little bit is if that front leg needs to work, it needs to drive the front hip to the backstop, not to the dugout. So I've been trying to get my daughters to land with that front leg a little bit open, basically just like you're doing when you're throwing. So when that front leg has to work, it fires the back or the front hip to the backstop, not to the dugout. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's awesome because it gets you to turn in a tighter window too.
Right.
So yeah, I like that a lot. That actually would help with what Coach Walter was asking with her question. Instead of thinking of that front foot or that front hip necessarily stopping, think of that front hip pulling back, and that will help kind of lock your pelvis into place too and decelerate it too. That's good.
There's some awesome Josh Donaldson videos where that is very apparent with his move, with his hip. There's some really good ones. I think, and I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I think hip mobility also plays a part in that. Because if you think about watching Griffey hit, you know, his front foot was closed off the entire time. But I'm assuming he had astronomical, you know, internal rotation on that front leg. Where if you watch guys like Jim Thome, that thing flew open very fast because of probably the opposite. But Casey, wow, that was a great question and some great cues there. That was great.
Yeah, that's good.
Jake asked a question here privately. He wanted to know if a slide board under the front foot would naturally get the hitter to create front foot torque, which I like because I know you've had Jaden use furniture sliders, and I've done the opposite. I've actually just taken kids' back shoes off to try to get the front foot to engage and just put them on rubber floor, and the back foot slides. And if they're not stable on their front side, they go all over the place. But what's your thoughts on using it on the front foot is what he asked, but what's your thoughts on the back foot as well, using a slide board or furniture slider?
I use them on both feet. Just keep the heels off of the slider. So encourage heel. The heels are where we're the most stable, right? When you're squatting in the weight room, your heels are on the ground, right? Our heels are where we're the most stable. That is the role of our legs, is to be stable, to allow our pelvis and our torso to move fast. We have to create stability. That's the role of the legs. So if you put a furniture slider or the little slidey discs like that you get at Five Below, like the workout discs, you know, put them under the ball of your foot, but keep your heel on the ground. And that way, no matter what you do, whether you stride across, stride open, you're trying to create torque, you're trying to create vertical force, horizontal force, it doesn't matter. All that's going to be created through your heel anyway on both legs. So if you put it on the back leg and your heel comes off the ground early, that thing's just going to slide away and you're going to lose your balance before you swing. The hitter will feel it right away. On the front leg, I recommend doing it, start it from, you can swing totally through, that's fine. But if you have someone who picks up their foot, they can't pick up their foot, obviously. They're going to have to slide it on the ground and hover a little bit, which is fine. But when you put your foot down, you want to push through the front heel as well, because that's where all your stability is going to come through. If you just look down at your leg when you're standing up, your hip, your knee, and your ankle all run through your heel. They don't run through the ball of your foot. So you want, if we're going to use that extension of our knee and our hip, we're going to use that extension to really create force into the ground, then you want your heel to be what's on the ground, not the ball of your foot. But I'm a big fan of using them under both legs, for sure.
That's awesome. All right, one more. I know that I see some moms and dads that I recognize that have some daughters. So I wanted to ask, let me see, I got to look at my notes here. I have a question and I want to make sure I'm wording it right. My printer broke, so I had to screenshot it on my phone. It's an awesome time for a printer to break when you're an online teacher, when you have to teach all your kids online.
Yep.
So I know you want to try to get away from the gender thing, so I apologize in advance. But for girls that want to try to follow in your footsteps and work in professional sports, what do you have suggestions for them as far as education goes, as far as how do they go that route? Because that's relatively new. I know there's females in front offices, but this is still relatively new. And it's sad to say because it's 2020, like it shouldn't be, but what do you have any kind of suggestions education-wise, and what kind of track would you recommend for that?
Rule number one, you have to be good enough. So you don't just get invited to the party because you're a girl. You have to actually be a good coach, and you have to actually do, like if other people are better than you, then you have to go and learn from them and be as good or better than them. So rule number one of anything that you do in life is you have to be good enough. You don't just get, I don't want to use the participation trophy analogy, but like you have to be, because I think that goes overboard too. Like I think people go overboard on that too, where now we're not being sensitive to like kids or people, right? But if you want to be good and be recognized in your field, then you have to be good enough. So that's number one. Number two, I think and I think the game is headed this way. I'm actually reading a book about it right now called Peak.
Yes, I'm reading it too.
Are you really? Yeah, like I'm reading it right now, and like they talk about how, it used to be like you had to be a specialist, right? And you had to be like, a hitting guru only works with hitters. And then, well, I need them to get stronger here. Okay, well then strength and conditioning does this, and then nutrition's over here, and none of them communicate and work with each other. And now the people that are top in their field are in the middle of all of those, and they know something about all of them. And so when you talk about hitting, we can't just only know about a bat and ball in our hands. We have to have a general knowledge of the human body. And so, and the way the game is headed, it's very tech forward right now. I don't know if that's going to change because budgets are likely going to change after this season. So I don't know if that's going to change with the implementation of new, gadgets and things to analyze. But if you can learn the technology side of baseball, whether you want to be a hitting coach or whether you want to work in the front office, you still need to, if you want to work in the front office and you want to work in data and analytics, like you got to learn what all of that means, right? So be good enough and then have some sort of general knowledge of the human body if what you want to do is hitting or pitching or whatever. But you can't just specialize in one field anymore. You have to kind of be good at everything now. And, I think that's where I've grown, at least over the last few years, is I've really tried hard to get, like, I was a history major in college. I took zero anatomy, physiology classes, zero. And so everything I've learned post-college just by picking up a book. I joke with everybody, but this is the honest to God truth. I have an anatomy and physiology coloring book to teach me where there are, the tendons and the muscles and everything in the body. And I've learned a lot from it. And just asking questions from people who know more than me. Like I've come to you and said, hey, I have this medicine ball circuit. Can you tell me if this looks like something you would have your athletes do? Because you have a background in exercise physiology that I don't. So like asking questions and reaching out to people can go a long way too.
And that, I know there's more in this chat, so I'm sorry if I don't hit your name, but like Casey and Rachel both, they know hitting, they know throwing, they know how the body moves. Like they're in the middle there. They know all of those things, and that's what makes them great coaches. And then the other thing with that, what do you think is the most important aspect of being a coach? Other than knowledge of the game, knowledge of the body, what do they need to master and get good at to be a good coach?
I think you need to have two things. Number one, you have to care about your players. You have to care, and they have to know that you care. And it can't be fake. It has to be real, right? Like, I think that your players have to deep down know that you love them. I think that is number one. You have to care. It has to keep you up at night when they don't do well. You have to care. That's number one. And number two, you have to communicate effectively. So, you can't get frustrated when the kid doesn't understand. They're an 11-year-old kid. If they don't understand, it's not their fault. It's your fault. And you have to be able to communicate with kids. And I think those two things, caring and communication are like, that's number one. And when you love your players, like it's got to be genuine because your players will know right away.
Mm-hmm.
Like they'll sniff that out like nobody's business.
100%. Wow, that was awesome, Rachel. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for everybody that was here. I'm gonna, like I said, this is recorded, so I'll post it up. You guys can watch it again, share it, whatever. Where can they find you on the socials if they want to follow you and they're not?
Everything is at Folden Fastpitch. So FOLD, I'll write it in the chat. And then if you want to go to foldenfastpitch.com, you can.
I highly recommend purchasing her membership. It's extremely cheap, and there are some amazing drills on there. So that would be a great purchase for you to make when you're off of this, when you go follow her, which if you're not following her, I would do that immediately as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to have some more time, I think. I don't think baseball's coming back for a little while, so I think I'm going to add some more stuff to the library too. So awesome.
Well, thank you so much. I learn exponentially whenever I get to talk to you, so I feel indebted.
Same to you. This has been fun. So let's do it again.
All right, sounds good. See you, everybody.
Right. Bye, guys.
Thank you.